Welcome back. This is CNN News. Now to stories making news across the continent. A child in Uganda has died of Ebola in the first cross-border case of the virus since an outbreak began in neighboring Congo a year ago. The World Health Organization and Uganda's Ministry of Health have confirmed 2 more cases in Uganda after the virus claimed the life of the 5-year-old boy. The health ministry says the 2 patients are the boy's relatives. The 2 patients whose blood samples tested positive for Ebola are relatives of the boy. The confirmation now brings the number of those WHO have been infected with the hemorrhagic fever to 3, fewer than 24 hours after the government announced the child as the first case in the country. Health Minister Dr. Jane Ruth says Uganda has been in preparedness mode ever since the Ebola outbreak was declared in DRC. She says the country now moves into response mode. WHO says the virus has killed nearly 1,400 people in the region since August of last year. Uganda hosts Africa's largest refugee population, 1.25 million people, with 2/3 having fled from South Sudan. Last year's peace deal raised hopes for some South Sudanese that they could soon return home. But the fragile peace has discouraged many from leaving Uganda's refugee camps despite struggles for adequate aid. Villa Halito Tomato reports from Adjumani, Uganda.
James Gwemawer joins other South Sudanese elders for a board game at the Maji refugee settlement in Uganda. It's been 6 years since he arrived here after losing his cattle during fighting in South Sudan. His family is scattered to different refugee settlements in Uganda, and he's still wondering when they can all go home.
I need to first witness peaceful resettlement of my people back home, with no war or tribal conflict before I can return. But now, I can't think of going back. Things are still bad. I can't leave.
63-year-old Madelena Moraya hopes to return to South Sudan one way or another.
My
husband died and was buried in South Sudan. My other children are buried there. When I die, I want to be buried beside them.
There are over 800,000 South Sudanese refugees in settlements just inside Uganda, more than 4 times the number in 2016. Uganda's State Minister for Refugees says their ability to help is being challenged.
We had never known that at any given time we'll host over 1 million people. We had always oscillated between 200,000, 300. That was what we knew, even at the peak of displacement from DR Congo, from Rwanda, and from Burundi. But when South Sudan collapsed, then we received refugees surpassing 1 million, and that overwhelmed our systems.
In May, Uganda and the United Nations Refugee Agency appealed for $927 million in funding to address refugee needs until 2020. The appeal is complicated by the alleged misuse of aid and exaggeration of refugee numbers that saw 4 Ugandan officials dismissed and investigations launched. The United Nations Refugee Agency says donors also no longer see the situation as an emergency.
We're falling short of what is really required in terms of access to basic services, such as education. Water is slightly better covered, health slightly better covered, but education, needs for environment, energy, protection, we're falling short of really what the refugees deserve and need.
For the time being, South Sudanese refugees in Uganda will get by on basic services and wait for the day when it is safe to return home. Halima Athmani for VOA News, Adjumani, Uganda.
Still in Uganda, the role of the 22,000 AMISOM troops and police in Somalia may phase out if the AU goes ahead with its plan to withdraw the forces and hand over the security of the region to Somalian military. Uganda is warning that such a plan should be responsibly executed. AMISOM soldiers and police are from 6 African countries. They are deployed to protect the Somalian government and to fight the militant.
The Ugandan army wants the gains made by the African Union mission in Somalia, known as AMISOM, may be lost if the plan to gradually pull out troops and hand over security to Somali forces is not handled carefully.
In this case, I think the timing was not very perfect, considering that some of the key enablers and force multipliers are really not in place. For example, there is an absolute shortage of helicopters, both utility and combat, that could, in such a case, take on missions that these troops that have been reduced over time would have done.
Uganda has over 6,000 troops in Somalia, more than any other country. The country says it will be necessary to empower the Somali army to deal with the militant group Al-Shabaab. Some security experts agree with Uganda's views, saying this decision of removal must not be rushed.
They are dealing with the war of ideology, which they allowed. In fact, the UN and other forces allowed this war to blossom for about 30 years. So it cannot be swept out in 1 minute. So it's a situation of being patient. If they don't want to lose the gains, they have got so far. We have got so far.
The UN Security Council renewed its authorization of AMISOM by 1 year, but decided to cut 1,000 troops from the 20,000 regional peacekeeping force. AMISOM has managed to gain control of the major towns in Somalia, but Al-Shabaab militants still occupy vast rural areas. Uganda was the first to deploy troops in Somalia in 2007. Other countries, including Kenya, Djibouti, Burundi and Ethiopia, are also now participating.